It had been the biggest corporate event of the year, held inside the city's most luxurious hotel. Crystal chandeliers sparkle above hundreds of executives, investors, and employees dressed in elegant evening wear. I arrived nearly 40 minutes late after being stuck in an unexpected client meeting. My wife, Emma, had texted me earlier saying she would already be inside, networking with her colleagues. As I stepped to the ballroom entrance, scanning the crowd for a familiar smile, my eyes suddenly froze. Across the room, Emma was standing in another man's arms. He wasn't simply greeting her. He held her as though they had known each other for years. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Every worst fear I'd ever buried came rushing back at once. I stayed hidden behind one of the marble pillars, unable to look away, my mind immediately filled with dark conclusions. The man looked confident, well-dressed, and significantly older than most guests. Emma appeared emotional, almost on the verge of tears, yet she wasn't trying to pull away. Instead, she whispered something into his ear before he gently placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Around them, nobody seemed surprised. Several executives even smiled politely as they walked past. That confused me even more. If this was an affair, why wasn't anyone reacting? Every instinct screamed that something wasn't right, but I couldn't stop assuming the worst. For weeks, little moments had quietly fueled my suspicion. Emma had been working late more often, attending confidential meetings, and occasionally receiving phone calls she would answer in another room. She insisted everything was related to an important company project, but after years of marriage, I had started noticing tiny changes in her behavior. She wasn't distant exactly, just distracted. Looking at her now with that mysterious man, every unanswered question suddenly felt connected. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, tempted to photograph the moment before confronting both of them in front of everyone. Before I could take another step, Emma turned and noticed me standing across the ballroom. The color drained from her face. For a split second, I thought guilt had finally exposed her secret. She hurried toward me while the older gentleman remained where he was, watching calmly. "Please," she whispered, "don't make a scene. Just give me 5 minutes." Those words only made everything worse. Why would an innocent person ask for 5 minutes? My chest tightened with anger. I had spent years trusting her completely, and now every painful possibility felt terrifyingly real. I ignored her request and walked directly toward the stranger. Conversations around us gradually faded as nearby guests sensed the growing tension. The man looked at me without fear, extending his hand politely. "You must be Daniel," he said with surprising warmth. I refused to shake his hand. "I think you've already met my wife," I replied coldly. Instead of becoming defensive, he simply smiled, a calm, knowing smile that somehow unsettled me even more. Emma stepped between us, desperately trying to explain, but neither of us spoke. The silence inside that glittering ballroom felt louder than any argument. Then something completely unexpected happened. The company's CEO approached us with several board members following behind. He greeted the older gentleman with obvious respect before turning toward me. "Daniel," he said, "I'm glad you finally made it. There's someone very important we'd like you to meet." I frowned in confusion. Everyone around us seemed strangely relaxed, as though they were watching a misunderstanding rather than a scandal. My anger slowly mixed with uncertainty. Had I misunderstood everything? Or was everyone somehow hiding the truth together? The CEO placed a hand on the older man's shoulder and smiled. "This is Richard Hale," he announced. "He's the founder of the scholarship that changed Emma's life 15 years ago." My thoughts came to a complete stop. Emma looked at me with tears in her eyes before quietly saying, "He's the reason I was able to attend college." Tonight was the first time I'd ever met him in person. Suddenly, every assumption I had made began collapsing. But as Richard reached into his jacket and removed a sealed envelope with my name written across the front, I realized the biggest surprise of the night had nothing to do with my wife. It had everything to do with me. I can absolutely write a full fictional story like this, but I can't help create stories that portray a real person as committing serious misconduct, such as infidelity, as if it were factual. If it's a fictional story, I can do that, because your requested story is about 1,300 words. It won't fit in a single response. We'll do it in 2 parts. I've already provided part 1, paragraphs 1 to 7, above. Now here's part 2, paragraphs 8 to 13. Richard slowly handed me the sealed envelope, while the ballroom around us faded into complete silence. My hands were still trembling from everything I had assumed only minutes earlier. Emma stood beside me, tears glistening in her eyes, but she didn't interrupt. I carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. It wasn't a business document or legal notice. Instead, it contained a handwritten message explaining that Richard had quietly followed the careers of every student whose education his foundation had supported. Emma had become one of his greatest success stories, and after learning about my own sacrifices to help her finish graduate school, he had requested a private meeting with both of us. I looked up, speechless. Richard smiled warmly before speaking again. "Your wife never asked me for another dollar after graduation," he said. "She earned everything through hard work. But every report I received mentioned one thing repeatedly, you." Confused, I frowned. He explained that Emma had always credited my encouragement during the hardest years of her life. When she nearly dropped out because of financial pressure, I had worked extra shifts without telling anyone so she could continue studying. She had shared that story in her annual letters to the foundation, never expecting anyone else to read them. Standing there, I realized she had been honoring me in private while I had spent weeks doubting her loyalty. Before I could even process those words, the CEO invited Emma and me onto the stage. Hundreds of guests turned toward us as the lights focused on the platform. My heart pounded for an entirely different reason now. Richard addressed the audience, explaining how true success wasn't measured by promotions or wealth, but by the people who quietly helped others reach their dreams. He praised Emma's determination, and then surprised everyone by telling my story instead. I stood frozen while applause echoed through the ballroom. The embarrassment I had expected had transformed into overwhelming humility. Then Richard revealed the real purpose behind the invitation. His foundation was launching a global leadership initiative designed to mentor young professionals from disadvantaged backgrounds. He wanted Emma to lead the program because of her remarkable journey. Then he turned toward me and offered something I never imagined. "Daniel," he said, "every leader needs someone who understands loyalty, sacrifice, and integrity. I'd like you to become our executive director." Gasps filled the room. It wasn't just a prestigious position. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, one that would completely change our future. As everyone celebrated around us, I quietly pulled Emma aside. Shame weighed heavily on my heart. I admitted that when I first walked into the ballroom and saw her embracing Richard, I had immediately believed the worst. I confessed every suspicion I had secretly carried over the previous weeks. Emma listened without interrupting. When I finished, she gently took my hand and smiled sadly. "I knew you'd misunderstood," she whispered. "That's why I begged you to wait 5 minutes. I wasn't hiding another man. I was trying to protect a surprise that was meant to honor both of us." Tears filled my eyes as I realized how easily fear can distort reality. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the ballroom lights began to dim, Emma and I stood together outside the hotel overlooking the city's glowing skyline. The envelope Richard had given me remained safely tucked inside my jacket. It represented far more than career opportunity. It reminded me how dangerous assumptions could be. One emotional moment had nearly destroyed years of trust. Instead of confronting my wife with anger, I had been given a lesson I would never forget. Relationships aren't broken by what we see. They're often broken by the stories we invent before learning the truth. Driving home that night, I replayed the evening over and over in my mind. I had entered the hotel convinced my marriage was ending, only to discover that the embrace I witnessed was one of gratitude, not betrayal. The mysterious stranger wasn't my rival. He was a man who had helped shape the woman I loved. The greatest shock wasn't seeing my wife in another man's arms. It was discovering how deeply she had appreciated everything we had built together without ever asking for recognition. From that day forward, I promised myself to replace suspicion with communication, because sometimes the most unbelievable twist isn't hidden betrayal. It's realizing the person you doubted had been believing in you all along.